Good afternoon, all. Just doing a quick mic check and then letting this sit here for a few minutes. Let me know if you can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer who's been working on Lord of the Rings for, well, 22 out of the 19 years that it's been running. Not that long, but I did take a break. But Welcome, everyone. For this stream, I wanted to mix things up a little bit. We've been doing a lot of running around throughout the world, kind of in the directions that I felt like going. And I thought this would be kind of a fun break, kick off the summer, just with doing a world Q&A. As I see requests for places to visit in the chat, I'll do my best to try to like bounce over to those spots and run around, talk a little bit about them. So if you have questions about world design, level design, what goes into making Middle Earth? I am happy to answer them. There are certainly, as always, going to be some topics that I'm not going to be talking about in this stream. Things like, class balance, lag, PvMP, things like the VIP program is also something that I'm not going to speak about. We have plenty of information regarding that elsewhere on our forums, Discord, social media, and whatnot. But feel free to hit me with any world design questions you have. Also, as I do talk a mile a minute sometimes, if you haven't seen me take a drink in a while, let me know. I got my black tea, I got my water, so I'm good to go on that front as well. And I thought, since I did kind of want to have this be a general Q&A kind of stream, it made sense to me to start the stream here on Weathertop, which is, I think, honestly, one of the first big things that we built for Lord of the Rings Online, even way back when it was Mio, as a showcase for what we were looking to achieve with the game. It's changed a lot over the years, but I do feel like, maybe outside of Breetown and Mickle Delving or Hobbiton, the Weathertop location is probably one of the most iconic early parts of the game for anyone. You finish up Breland and it is just this imposing edifice, this major point of interest that you see off in the distance, and as you play through the content, it takes you there, and you actually get to climb up it, and you get to be where I am right now. So it felt good to start here. I know Orion was was the designer working on the original like prototype instance spaces for Weathertop, because originally it was, I think our plan was to have it be an actual instance, and so we put a lot of work into it to kind of showcase the things that we can do in instances, as we were preparing to bring Lotro to various shows, bring it to E3, consumer gaming shows, like those sorts of things. So I know he put a lot of work into it, and honestly, I think Weathertop for him is what the Troll Shaws is for me. Like, how many times do we have to redo this and redo this and redo this? So, but yeah, it felt like a good place to start our day today. I did, before I went too far into this and into the questions in chat, there was one question that was asked in the announcement thread for this on the forums that I figured might as well drop in and respond to that real quick too. Zyrus on the Lotro forums had three questions. Were there changes in plans for regions before? For example, an NPC goes missing during time at Helm's Deep and reappears in Amphalos years later in real life. Was there a plan to go to Amphalos after visiting Dol Amroth for the first time? Or in things like the Minstrel Prophecy, was that perhaps intended to happen in Minas Morgul? We meet an NPC who dreams a restless dream and goes to Minas Morgul with us. Was the original plan to meet him in the tower in Minas Morgul? So to answer that question, I think our plans are always somewhat fluid. We have a general near-term direction for where we want to take our main overland story arc, where we want that to go, and what characters we want to have come along. And then anything else is kind of like filled in as, more so as the content designers are figuring out what they want to do for their stories. I think Atli Spiderbane is a great example of that, where you have this character that you are introduced to as part of some players' starter experience, depending on the characters you create. But you have this character that is foundational for the player experience in the very early game, and then Atli Spiderbane comes back as part of our Minas Morgul expansion pack. And that wasn't necessarily the plan for that character the whole way through, but it is something that as the content designers were working on things, they thought it would both be a fun throwback or a fun way to tie some things together and just give characters moments, right? Characters that might have been forgotten or lost. There are times where I think about characters from that early game that players have engaged with, and are there ways to use them? And that's usually not, for me anyways, the kind of work I do doesn't usually incorporate character stuff in it, but it's a fun thought exercise as well. So as far as things like the minstrel prophecy and whatnot, that isn't something I can specifically answer. I know Maid of Lions had a bunch of ideas as towards what those prophecies mean, but I think that's a question better suited for him than for me. I think there might be one or two left of those prophecies that we haven't yet fulfilled. So who knows when we will get to them. Um, all right, so let's take a look at some of these questions. So Thangdrum says Trestle Span easily in the top 5 bridges. I think Span was, and you can kind of see it's the background art for this stream's logo is our concept art piece that was done way back when for Trestle Bridge and the Trestle Span, and you can kind of see a little bit of how you know how it changed between being built and being concept and being implemented, and that happens with everything that we do. Um, but yeah, I figured it was a nice piece. It was a nice throwback to the original creation of the game, and it was a much like coming here to Weathertop. It made like a bit of fun sense to incorporate that into the theme. Um, so Captain Kieran says, I would love to see a Numenos. I've always wanted to know the story of the brass and copper images that are on the building's spire. Are they random free assets grabbed from the internet, or something that actually tells a story from Middle Earth? Um, I would imagine those are more just like artists' creations. Um, I think I don't know specifically what you're talking about, but often we will use photographic source for building some of those structures, even if it's just as a foundation for the direction of things. So if there are images and whatnot associated with those kinds of structures, we do have things where images are very specifically created to tell a story, but then there are other times where we had an artist who took a trip somewhere, and this happened actually a lot in Umbar and Harad, where an artist took a trip. We so for Umbar, actually Chris Pearson, our world lead at the moment, our world lead, um, I say at the moment because everyone on the world team has at one point been the world lead. Uh, but when Chris Pearson went on a vacation to Italy, he spent a lot of time taking photographs as source material for, particularly if there were more Moorish or Mediterranean buildings that he was coming across. He was taking photos all the time, both for his own purposes, but also to bring them to our art team to say like this is really cool and that's really cool and we should try to incorporate these things, as they were going. And we had one of our artists took a trip to Egypt, just as a for his own vacation, a couple of years ago. And when we were heading towards Marjala, a lot of the photography he took in Egypt was stuff that he then used as inspiration for the assets that he created in Marjala. So, I think there are instances where those kinds of images are created just to fill the tableau, and then there are times where those images, particularly in like Rohan, for example, we have tapestries and whatnot that are very specifically detailed tapestries to tell stories. So, bit of A, bit of B. For suggestion, Thangdrum says for suggestions, maybe going through different types of zone, Tales of Yore, alt leveling experiment versus new and old regions. I'm not sure what that's in context to. Um, I think, oh, perhaps as far as places to go. Well, it'll be easier for me as we progress through here. If people have requests for places to go, just put them in chat. Because I want you guys, I want you all to drive where I'm going, and I will do my best to keep up with the chat in here. Mr. Alex says, why don't you make the walls around smaller towns accessible to players? Apart from 1 to 2 major cities, many towns have these huge, thick walls, but we can't actually go up and walk around them. Being on top of city walls is a big part of the atmosphere in fantasy medieval worlds, so this feels like a missed opportunity for exploration and immersion. Well, so some of that is depending on when the location was built. Some of it was for performance purposes. You know, the more, and you can see this in Breetown as an example, the more we have to build out in detail, the more assets we have to use to make that detail happen, and that can not be super performant. You look at Minas Tirith, for example. I think we're going to always forever going to be working on Minas Tirith to bring down the asset count, bring down the amount of um, loading issues that happen in that, and bring up the frame rate, bring up performance, and we kind of each take a stab at that every so often. Whenever we come up with a new thing. Most recently, we did this is something that we did in Umbarba Harbel, as well as like we went through and did a client only pass, flagging a bunch of assets so that they can be client only. Another reason why we don't necessarily have every location fully explorable all the time is for either gameplay purposes. The space may be kind of an instancy space that we need to really focus on the main thoroughfare of the content that's happening there, and thus all the stuff on the sides kind of gets hemmed off, closed off. Or it could be, again, related to performance stuff where we're kind of constraining what we build, and then the areas that we haven't built, because of that, aren't built for people to actually be on, and they're rife with stuck spot issues and places where players can get trapped. And we don't want to make those kinds of things available by default. And we are always building fast, working quick. And so if there are opportunities for us to not do something, um, it is not always as simple as let's just build it all out, where it's like, oh, we're looking at our schedule and it's like, well, if I build this all out so players can get up on these walls and walk around, then that's going to take me another week. And that week could also be better spent on things like, oh, we have another instance we need to build, or there's other bugs that need to be fixed, those sorts of things. So it's a balance. um, Garudian says, are things like quest and story design on the table? um, I'm not. There may be some aspects of those kinds of questions I can answer, but I would say um, I'm not going to be the best person to answer those questions. Uh, Lady Calathil says, I like how the Angmar Mordor Portal Nazgul fights use the Weathertops instances. Yeah, that was something that Vastin pulled together to try to give those spaces a little bit of extra spice. I came in and helped him out a little bit here and there, just with some light touch on things like terrain painting and whatnot, since it's not really his area of familiarity. But just to try to make it feel a little bit better, to work in those spaces, even though the encounter interiors themselves are pretty simple and basic. Um, let's see. Sarah Bella says, "Thank you so much for making such a beautiful world. This game helps so many of us, and we get so much enjoyment from Lotro. You are appreciated." Well, thank you. I think so many of us on the team are excited and passionate about the setting as well, and hopefully that comes across in what we build. Um, I think one of the things that's always on the front of my mind as I'm working on stuff is how can we make something that feels like home, right? Like, something that players want to explore, something that players want to linger in, and I think Weathertop actually is a great example of that sort of thing where, you know, you come up on top of Weathertop, and I know people that will just sit here at the top of the mountain and watch the day go by, right? They'll watch the sunrise, they'll watch the sunset, and they'll take in the views of everything around them. I've said before, if there's one thing that I wish we could do is improve the way the terrain looks at a distance, at least before the fog starts coming in. When the fog comes in, I think it works fine. But I wish we could get some good, higher detail terrain in the distance. All right, Garudian says, seconding on Mr. Alex's question, expanding to a general, why do city and structures so frequently feature invisible walls? They keep us from climbing onto stuff. And it's that sort of thing, simplified physics, simplifying where people can go is generally better and safer, especially if we're planning on things outside of that main playable area being pretty loose. I know there are some locations, like I know Dale has a lot of this kind of thing in it. I know some towns in Gondor have this kind of thing in it. Some of it too, I think, is designer preference. I think the designer, for example, that built Dale, and the design who was, I think, the same designer who laid out some of the towns in Gondor, came from a background and experience where that kind of more limited accessibility to a space was sort of like expected. And so we all bring our own approach individually to these sorts of things that we build. So for me, when I build stuff, I do what I can to try to make the intended playable areas be as wide open and whatnot as possible. It's why Swanfleet and Cardolan are the way they are. Is where we look. I looked at what we had built for all the other regions of that um, level range, and it was kind of like, well, a lot of those are kind of hemmed in, walled off areas where like you can see something and run to it, but you can't necessarily get up on it. And I wanted Swanfleet and Cardolan to kind of be the opposite of that, be these big, broad, open regions that you can explore around in. Rainier says, how do you balance what you as a developer would like to add to the world, but have to be very mindful of the lore? So I would say the balance is generally lore first. So we construct a space based off of the information that's available in the source material first. Followed by that, then we add in the layer of what we narratively construct for that region. So thinking of things like Umbar, Ikerban Valley, Merjala, there was a kind of rough floor plan, right? Thinking of it like a house, right? Like, okay, these regions are open concept, really no walls inside floor plan for the house. Then it's up to one of us, usually Chris Pearson, who's our lore guru, to come in and start building the walls in the interior. Laying out the electrical plan, the plumbing plan, that sort of thing. Our rivers, our streams, like anything beyond what is initially on the map, figuring out the cultures that go there. And then finally, when a region comes to be developed by someone like me, like a world designer, we then take the source, take the created stuff that Chris has made, take the ideas and plans from our content designers, and then also our own interests and goals for those regions and how we want them represented, and combine them all together, working with the art team, working with the design team to come up with something. Um, and I find often my opportunities for what I would like to add are often very like little macro things that I discover as I'm working on the landscape. I'll be building a river or something, and then as I'm like smoothing terrain, the terrain might like dip down a little bit and create a nice little like oxbow or marsh or something accidentally, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I could do work something like this, and there's a bit of a stream of consciousness build out in that sense. Tangdrum says, would you ever consider doing cartography streams for older regions and expansions? It's something that we could consider. I think one of the things that makes building the expansion region based cartography streams uh, easier, I would say, and not that like coming up with the content for a stream is ever something I would say is easy, but certainly makes it more more simple. Is that the information that I would use for those streams is more recent and readily available than some of the older stuff. You know, I may not have the, well, I certainly know I don't have any of the like in progress height map stuff or the stuff that I created in World Machine for something like Breetown and whatnot. And so the format would be a little bit different for those sorts of streams if I were to go back and do a cartography. It would also probably take a little bit more like research because again, they're not fresh in memory. They're not something that um, we are, you know, immediately um, in the front of mind. You know, and I find too like I am busy enough that usually if it is not something that I am working on immediately, it is it's something that kind of gets pushed out of my brain. Let's do a quick because I have at the point I'm at right now, I have not yet seen a request for a location to visit. So we're going to take a quick detour. So maybe we go. There we go. Since I was talking about Swanfleet, let's head ourselves over to Swanfleet for a little bit. These were fun little. This was a fun region to build, Swanfleet. It still feels like, you know, there was a lot of carte blanche to the region, um, and so there was an opportunity to really play with the world design here and kind of take more lead. Like we knew where the major roads were, but it wasn't something where we had as detailed um, a backstory, you know, a created backstory for this. And so that gave us kind of the opportunity to be a little bit more fun and flexible and experimental in the landscape design. Hirok says, was there a zone that you absolutely dreaded making, like not your style, or with a very quick deadline? Let's see. I mean, I have done the troll shaws over and over again at this point. So anytime I have to do work in the troll shaws, I'm always just kind of like, ah, not this again. Because I've constructed it, I think a couple times now for the actual game. There have been prototype things that we've done that have involved the troll shaws. So I feel like that kind of that zone is more just like another like not again kind of thing. Um, as far as regions that I've other regions that I've worked on that I've kind of that I've dreaded, I don't think I would say uh, that I've dreaded any, though I will say like there are certainly ones that I've been less excited about than others. Um, you know, I think let's see. Most recently, I think the what I run into more is a little bit of a designer's block when it comes to figuring out the approach to the scenery usage, like scene asset usage in certain areas. Like working in Urishtar was like once I figured out what I was doing in Urishtar, I really enjoyed it. But in the lead up to it, trying to figure out like what the landforms for the terrain I was going to use in here and how I wanted it to look and how the elevation should look compared to other like the background logistics of it was very tiring because like I kept trying different things and each time I tried different things it wasn't quite working the way I wanted it to work. And I eventually got to a point where I just kind of realized like I need to rely less on the landscape to achieve what I want to achieve with this region because the landscape was just not working for me. So that's why we have these like really tall plateaus with a lot of like tall cliff rocks embedded into it. And the look and feel of Urishtar is more about the cliff rocks and honestly like getting those ravine assets that kind of flank a lot of the waterways really clicked it for me as well. Captain Kieran says, you've mentioned in the past using design Bibles for new areas. Is there ever a chance we'd ever see sneak peeks or glimpses at some of the early areas in Area Door? I don't think that documentation really exists. Not at least not in a form that is very presentable. Sarah Bella says, you can tell from these streams how much you care, and that makes the game even better. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel like you don't work on a game for as long as many of us have worked on a game if there wasn't a lot of care, a lot of love for what we're doing and for the setting that we're doing it in. I think the older the game gets and the more advanced other games get, it definitely like brings a little sadness to our hearts that we don't always get to play with the toys that other people that we know might get to be playing with on other projects. um, but I think there is a charm and a love in the Lord of the Rings setting that really helps us stay interested and stay excited about it. Mr. Alex says, about the question for the walls, I want to clarify that I only want defensive walls around the surrounding cities, not every house and building. Well, there are certainly some people that would love to be able to get up on every single house and building, and I have seen them all do it in Breetown. uh, all right, let's go. So Garudian says, is there a biome terrain type you have not gotten a chance to make or to fully realize that you would like to get a chance to tackle in the future? So for me, I think the only really kind of biome that I haven't really gotten to play with um, that is still like something that is not very common in Lotro in general is you know geothermal magmatic kind of spaces. And I think the the space to work with that is somewhat limited because in general there's this one big volcano that we know about and we've done that. So I think that is the kind of biome that I haven't really had a chance to play with yet in Lotro, and I'm not sure when that opportunity or if that opportunity will come up again. But I feel like that's the kind of the one distinct one style landscape that we've done before that I haven't played too much in. One of the things that I really enjoyed about working in the Hatakali Fells was it was an opportunity to take elements of all of the biomes in Ikerbon and Rajala and Shield Isles and Umbar that I hadn't been able to play with previously because other people were working in those zones and find ways to incorporate them in there. So that was a lot of fun. I didn't really get to do too much work with palm trees. I did it a little bit in, Amberol. So yeah, that I think eventually we do find our ways to play around with toys that we haven't had the chance to yet, and so something like the Hatakali Fells was a great space to do that. Um, so Hecky Staffman says, I'm almost afraid to ask, but are there any updates regarding the tree flickering issue with those white outlines or foliage flickering problems? Um, I am aware of those issues that you were experiencing. I know that uh, our tech art lead, has been looking into some of those issues, and I know he's done a bunch of changes recently uh, regarding the engine and rendering stuff. I'm not sure where those fixes to those issues that you are commenting on specifically might be in the pipeline, if they are part of it, if they are something that's still investigation, or if that's something that is kind of backlogged. But there is an awareness of them at the very least. Lady Calathil says some older regions have fun little hidden Easter egg type goodies tucked in various corners of the landscape, such as Three Bears Home, Killer Rabbits, etc. Are there or will there be any type of goodies in the newer areas? I think all of that, it kind of goes back to the question earlier about people, us being able to leave our marks in regions and whatnot as we work on them. And, oftentimes those little Easter eggs are things that are little things that someone has undertaken in their spare time, and the ability or interest in adding them into new regions that we build really does depend on how much free time someone has to do those sorts of things. So, for example, I suppose I am infamously known for hiding deep claws in various places around the world. And um, for those eagle eye of you out there, you may have discovered one that was newly added within the past year, for example. Um, Lady Catha also asked, would there ever be interest in sneaking a new Floyd and DeWitt deed for higher level regions? That would be up to a content designer to take on if that was something they were interested in. uh, Nynaeve says, or Nanev, says, how often are you working with concept art versus creating the environment from scratch yourself? Is concept art really mostly used for significant structures or points of interest? It varies and depends a lot on the biome we're attempting to create. If we're making something that we can find strong real world photo reference for, we tend to lean on that more so than concept art. If there are points of interest or locations that we don't really have good like bits and pieces equivalents that we can get, um, or don't have a strong initial vision for, we'll work with our concept artist to create concepts of those pieces. Points of interest, significant ones particularly, that need a custom asset, often get concept art to go along with them. And if we're doing something that is kind of far afield, something that's weird as far as terrain goes, something that, again, we don't really have a good reference to pull from in the real world, we can often ask our concept artist to come up with like a mood board for us. We will give the concept artist kind of a general overview of what we want, or be like, here's an analog region, kind of like this, but with this extra other stuff replacing it or mixing it up into it. And so we'll get a mood board out of that to kind of help guide what we do for asset creation, what we do for terrain layout, those sorts of things. Um, Thangrim says, since finishing up in Harad Umbar, is there anything you've particularly missed building? In terms of like places we've been before, I'm always a sucker for forests. And so while we had some forests, like I built Atagame, we had Imular as well, and kind of forested areas kind of between Imular and Kudzigin. I'm always a sucker for mountainous forests, and those are always my happy place. So when I get opportunities to build those, I'm happy to jump into them. So I think what we had done through the whole Umbar and Harad arc was really interesting as far as landscape goes, because it was new. It was a fresh challenge for us to think about how to build those kinds of landscapes. But I will always never say no to going back to building a like forested mountain area when I'm given the opportunity to. Uh, See You Tiger says, "What was the reason for adding so many stables in the Troll Shaws? I agree it needed it more than it had in the past, but it seems a bit overdone. The biggest reason for it is the traversability. Um, it's still a somewhat lower level area, and a lot of the Troll Shaws is dead end alleys, basically, and that's very um, frustrating, or can be very frustrating to players when they're just trying to get from point A to point B. So adding in those stables was kind of an important portion of the work that was being done in that region at the time. Um, I think we were also coupling it with some changes to quest content that was happening in the area to improve the flow of the region. And so yeah, adding those extra stables in for to help support the traversability of the region was my main goal in there. I know some people were frustrated because the implementation of that, it was going to be easier for me to completely redo the whole stable network, which meant all new destinations and whatnot, which led to people needing to go back to rediscover them. Um, but on new characters, you're just discovering them organically, so it's less of an issue. All right. Shadar says, "Are you relieved that Amazon killed their MMO? I bet it's a little bit bittersweet." Um, I don't really have too much of an opinion one way or another on the Amazon MMO. I feel like any MMO that wants to exist needs to have its own calling card, and I feel like Lotro as the story MMO, particularly for the Lord of the Rings setting, is its calling card, and that's what we focus on and what we're good at. And had the Amazon MMO continued, I'm sure they would have found their own niche to fill and their own voice to coexist. Uh, so Elfwenia says, "I don't know if it's been answered, but are there plans to return to Mordor at some point to visit Nirn and the Sea of Nirn?" The nice thing about Lord of the Rings is, we have all of these open spaces that we can go to and we can visit, and when we choose to do so, they are right there waiting for us. I know Mordor you know, has more to it than just Gorgoroth and Mount Doom. And it's something that particularly the filling in the gaps thread on the forums regularly comes back to, is people wanting to see the Sea of Nirn and Lithlad and whatnot. And certainly something that we hear and are aware of the interest in it. As far as when we'd be going back there, I can't give you any information about that. It's not something that is on the immediate radar for me. Uh, Hodraric says, "Ever consider revamping, expanding old systems like Ward Seed, Skirmish, and the Talent Tree for Rohan instances?" That is a question I'm not suitable to answer. That's more of a systems question. And you would probably be better off trying to ask that to Alan Mackey, Orion, or posting about it on the forums or message boards, and maybe one of the systems designers will pick it up there. Lady Caliphil says, "Note to self, find the newest added Deep Claw. Thanks for the answers and for caring so much about our beloved game." Shader VD says, "How much you have free will in terms of what and how you how you add to the game? Do Lord of the Rings IP owners have impact on what you add? So we work closely with Middle Earth Enterprises, though I think now it's called Middle Earth and Friends. Um, they are our license holder. So whenever we introduce something new to the game, a new region, not necessarily in regions that we already worked in, but in a new region, a new place that we haven't been before, or introducing new characters that we haven't introduced before that are our lore characters, we always interact with them to get approvals because it's important to make sure that you know we're kind of sanity checking what we're doing, that it follows the IP. It isn't going outside of their comfort level when it comes to what we're doing, and I think we have a very good relationship with them on that front. It's not often that we get pushback on what we're doing and what we want to do because we have built a pretty good relationship and a pretty good trust with the people that work there. And so I feel like it's a good collaboration between the two of us, and often, they'll look at what we see, what we're planning, and are very much just like, yep, make it happen. So Thangdrum says, if you were ever to do more Tales of Yore, where do you think could be some candidates to warrant a different version? One of the ones that I'm intrigued about doing is Tales of Yore, Fornost, and Anuminos. Um, at the peak of the war with Angmar, I think would be a really interesting setting. Um, I think anything with Tales of Yore, if we were ever to do more, I think it would be important to have the Tales of Yore version highlight a very clear, distinct visual difference between the original version and um, the Tales of Yore version. And I think something like Fornost and Anuminos at their peak and during the war with Angmar uh, could be really a really compelling space and a really interesting um, juxtaposition between that and what is actually in the game itself already. Um, I know there are some locations in like the corners of the world where someone started kind of like working on a in the past version of Fornos just as a spare time like fun thing that they were doing, and it's like it's something that could have legs if it was ever we ever wanted to go and do that. Fuzalhaini says, I would really like to see a Nurzarm raid to properly wrap up the Wildermore story, as right now it feels a bit rushed and unfinished, as if you guys ran out of time at the end of the development cycle. Any chance of ever revisiting older content and adding to it? Um, I think as long as a designer has the time for it, there's nothing necessarily that precludes it. Um, the whole concept behind, and this isn't specifically to having like a raid piece of content for the example you gave, but part of the reason why things like the further adventures missions exist is as an opportunity for any designer who had the spare cycles to be able to play with characters and settings that they have an interest in and exploring in. And so like I feel like that's the case with a lot of other things where it's like whether it's a world design project, a content project, a systems project, if there's room in the schedule for it and it feels like and it can align with something in the future, there's not necessarily a reason for us to not explore something like that, or to explore things that a designer might be interested in themselves. Uh, Lady Caliphil says, I don't know if you worked on Foreshell, but it's an amazing landscape that is so different from any other region. The aurora in the evening is stunning, which makes it a very lovely place to visit at night. Yeah, so um, basically everything, I want to say up through till maybe Rohan. The way the world design team worked is basically every world designer worked on a region together, and we had to very carefully balance who was working with where, so we weren't like stepping on each other's toes. So Forest Shell was a region that, the honestly the world team that now exists on Lotro is also the world team that built Forest Shell, and there was a lot of uh, exploration of new ways to build the landscape happening in there. Foreshell is one of the first regions where we started exploring with lower impassables so that you can see further into the distance, even though it's just like a ditch keeping you from getting there, getting beyond it. It was the first region to have the dual height map tech used because we wanted to. We were at the time we were building Foreshell. We were also pre-producing Moria, and we had gotten the dual height map tech, which means like the ceiling height map that we used in Moria. We had gotten that tech, and we wanted to test case it in a live setting prior to launching Moria, and prior to putting a lot of work into building the cave ceilings in Moria. So the glacial tunnel in Foreshell was the first actual dual height map space in game, and we were using that as our test bed for it. Uh, so yeah, that's kind of where we're at uh, with Foreshell. I think it's great too. I know we spent a lot of time trying to figure out the um, the Aurora for it as well. All right. I think it's time to. We got about 15 minutes left. I think it's time to change our location. So why don't we go to? Why don't we go here? Uh, oh, that didn't work. Did I put in the wrong? Maybe. There we go. That worked. Maybe. This was a fun space to build. I had a lot because with Karanost, um, we had just as part of the Before the Shadow expansion pack, we had an artist, our world artist went through and revamped all of our old Arnorian ruin assets, updating the models and textures so that things were a little bit more efficient, and so that we could more effectively like build with them and have them be a little bit more performant. And Karanost was the initial test bed for all of these updated assets, and also just playing with the assets to see, because a lot of our Arnorian ruins were pretty scattershot. Like we're just like we're gonna throw a wall here, we're gonna throw a building there, like nothing that ever really felt like it was an actual um, city or space that um, that would exist. And so Karanost was an attempt to like build something that felt like it was actually something, actually what would be built. Uh, and so this was like a fun little experiment. We were talking a little bit about, you know, world design and our goals and objectives and doing things for ourselves as we're building spaces. And Karanost was definitely one of those. Like what can we do with these assets to make them feel like they ought to feel, and feel like it's a more modern usage of them. Captain Kieran says, all of my questions are even based. Sorry. Would you guys ever redesign the cities of Fornost or Anuminos to a smaller scale, but as detailed as Minas Tirith? I think as they are, we would probably leave them untouched. And I think the opportunity for mixing things up, adding more scale to or more detail to them is more like what we would do with either something like um, uh, and my brain just went blank. New Karn Doom. New Karn Doom was not necessarily meant to replace existing Karn Doom, the original Karn Doom, but more meant to be an imagining of it using modern tools, modern design practices, and a modern approach to look and feel. But it's its own little kind of like separate island floating off in the distance somewhere. And I feel like if we were ever to do something like that for a Numinos, for Fornost, it would really be in its own bubble somewhere where we kind of hand wave the notion that it's not the same, but it is the same. Like this isn't new Fornost. This is Fornost. It's just a reimagined version of Fornost for a very specific purpose. So yeah, I think that's where we would land with that. Thangdrum says Vales of Anduin has always been my comfort zone with the Bjorning and Woodsman villages. It's very comfy vibes. Vales of Anduin was one of my favorite regions to work on, in large part because of the comfy vibes, the we're in a forest kind of thing. Let's see. Why don't I go to, since we mentioned Vales of Anduin. There we go. No, that's not what I wanted to do. You go here. Hordoric says Moria is my second favorite map. I love that I get to spend. I love to, that I spend all of my time in an amazing cave exploring with my goat. The fun thing about Moria was, originally the plan for Moria was to not allow people to have mounts at all in it um, because Moria is scary, and horses don't like scary. Um, and so that was kind of a negotiation between the world and content teams. Excuse me. As we were building it, because we were like, um, we really need to be able to allow mounts in here. We really need to be having a stable master system. We can't hew so closely to the story that we remove a core navigation feature for players, and that's why the goats exist. Because we're like, well, goats are probably less skittish than horses. Let's make that happen. Druid's Fire says, speaking of getting new tech scenario, you recently said that folks have some new landscape tech you were looking forward to. How's that going? So I think I've talked a little bit before about how like whenever we get a new asset set, there's always this little bit of experimentation time that we take in order to get used to what the new features can mean for us. And there are a couple of things that we're introducing with our fall expansion pack, a couple of new features for our landscape that certainly fall into that category. So, like I think um, the terrain specific features are ones that I'm using less in the region that I'm making than I know the other, at least one of the other world designers is using pretty extensively in his. And then there's a new spin on our fence system that I've been playing around a lot with, and I've spent maybe the last week or so, working closely with one of our artists and like building test spaces, playing with what the artist has been making, giving feedback, and we've just kind of been in this iterative loop on working with these new assets, and how to best integrate them with the landscape and make them feel good. But I think with both of these features, and I know I'm being super vague about it because I'm also not sure how much we're gonna lean on some of these as like cool, exciting things to talk about for the expansion pack specifically. Um, but we've been like iterating on both of these kinds of features and working with our art team pretty closely to like figure out how to use them and how we can bring them into the world at large beyond what we're just working on right now. So it's exciting, it's interesting, and it's stuff that I've been hoping that we could get into our terrain for a very long time, and I'm excited that we're actually getting it. Um, Lady Calathil says, I recently got a 4K monitor, and aside from a few UI issues, I'm seeing so many fabulous details in buildings, clothing. The graphics you all have created are incredibly impressive, especially considering the age of the game. You all are amazing. We're making the most of it. That's we're AAAing as hard as we can within the confines of the game and our engine. So Riordan says, uh, this is what I also think of this game. The world is designed with so much soul. It's still impressive and visually interesting, and so much environmental storytelling. That I think sometimes we often have to stop ourselves and remember that we still need to incorporate gaminess into the landscape at times. Often when we're doing like landscape reviews and whatnot, one of the things that will always come up whenever we're building a region is we get into the weeds when we're building it, and sometimes forget that you know we need to incorporate places to show off what we've built. Even speaking of like where I am right now at this on this rock promontory is a direct example of that kind of conversation where we're doing a review and someone was like, it'd be really great if we could see the whole valley that's being built here, just be able to get a good panoramic view. And originally, like, this rock wasn't here because I built this area here, and someone was just like, it would be really nice to be able to just like see everything. And that's why this rock is here, to just like show it off so that you can get a spot where you can just like look around and see what's going on. So Dat for Stage Artist says, it's not canon, but a cave claw mount would be really cool at this point, since they became a part of the LOTRO universe. Honestly, you could probably use the bore mount rig to make a cave claw or deep claw mount work. So it's not super far fetched. Um, but I'm sure as I say that, I fully expect to leave the stream and look at my team's chat with all the reasons from Made of Lions why we can't do that. So, well, thank you everyone. We are just about out of time. So if there are any other questions, feel free to drop them in super quick so I can get to them. But we are just about out of time. I think for the next stream, I'll probably get back to doing a theme. I may go and do some more rivers, because it's been a while since it's been a whole stream cycle since we've looked at some streams. Um, so I might do a like Rivers of Eriador stream. That might be a good way to go. Is start with Rivers of Eriador, where we'll hit everything except for the Brandywine River. Because there aren't a ton of rivers, bodies of water in Eriador, so I think we could probably do one stream just of that. So let's make that the plan for our next stream. Rivers of Eriador. Um, as far as other streams that are coming up, next week we have a Cave Troll stream with Alan Mackey, Orion, and myself. We're hoping to have a special guest on for that as well. I just need to confirm availability. Another of our awesome team members joining us to talk about Lotro. So that is our goal for then. So, anyways, Thank you, everyone, for coming, hanging out, asking your questions, and just listening to me ramble on about what goes into building Lord of the Rings online. Honestly, we wouldn't have this game without you guys. So thank you all for being here, for playing, for being excited about the game, and for spending your time in Middle Earth. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you all next week. Have a good one.